So here's what I wrote, and I think it contextualizes why healthcare is so front of mind for a lot of people.
Yeah.
When future generations look at our current moment in history, what will we be remembered for? Undoubtedly, artificial intelligence will be near the top of the list. Similarly, the world's response or lack of response to climate change. But one that escapes our headlines today, but will likely be equally as profound as these first two, is the healthcare revolution underway. Since scientists first mapped the human genome in 2003, a project that took 13 years and cost $3 billion, we've seen accelerating breakthroughs in healthcare. It now costs $600 and takes 2 weeks to map a genome, ushering in an era of personalized medicine. And technologies like CRISPR are offering more than just an understanding of the genome. They offer the opportunity to edit it and all of the ethical questions that come with that. This is just the start of a long list of medical breakthroughs that include AI-powered drug discovery, mRNA vaccines, GLP-1 drugs, 3D printing organs. It is truly an amazing moment we're living through.
Well said. 3D printing organs is one that I get really excited about.
It is pretty phenomenal. And as I was reading that, I did realize that we're actually not going to talk about any of those technological breakthroughs.
That's the exciting part about it. We have done a number of episodes. This just takes me back to the work that the Hearts and Minds guys do and what we saw when we went to the conference late last year. But Ren, let's to your point, we're not going to talk about a lot of those breakthroughs today because the healthcare industry is so vast that in today's episode we've drilled down on one key sector of that. Let's start by going through all the segments in healthcare just to tick them off. So we've got 4 major segments. There's hospitals and medical services, which include public and private hospitals, GPs, specialists, pathology and diagnostics. You've got pharmaceuticals and biotech, so that's everything from drug development and manufacturing, clinical trials and research. Then there's the health insurance segment, private health insurance providers and the public side, which is Medicare, and then medical devices and equipment, manufacturing, distribution of the devices, and all of the innovative health tech startups that Ren just spoke about. So plenty to cover there, but in today's episode, we're not talking pharmaceuticals, we're not talking health insurance as devices. We're drilling down on hospitals and the providers.
Yes. And so today we're talking about the federal government. No, state governments.
State governments.
I mean, look, they play a massive role, but I guess let's talk about the industry today, and then I'll give you my quick 40-year history on how we got here.
Okay.
So the Australian healthcare sector is valued at approximately $241 billion a year. That's from the Australian Institute of Health and Welfare. For comparison, Australia's grocery sector is about $130 billion a year. Apparently, iron ore mining is about $130 billion as well. I think the overall Australian mining industry is in the $300 billions.
Right, there you go.
So, that gives you some context. It's almost double the size of Australia's supermarket sector, but captures none of the headlines.
Yeah. Profit gouging.
And it's been a pretty good performer.
Yeah, so the ASX 200 Healthcare Index has performed reasonably well. Last 12 months, it's actually down 3% compared to the ASX 200, which is up 8%. But if you zoom out a bit, the last 5 years, it's up 32% compared to the ASX 200 of 22%. And then the last 20 years, the index is up 1,037% compared to the ASX 200. Up only 132%.
Have you? I don't know if... Yeah, that's
Come
not...
on, ASX.
Yeah. Dividends not included there.
Yeah.
1,000%. So the index is 10 bagged.
Yeah.
I wonder how much of that is attributable to really just CSL.
CSL, yeah.
Yeah, like Cochlear has obviously been incredible as well. ResMed's been incredible, but CSL just for sheer size.
Absolutely crushed it.
Yeah. So the healthcare sector has done well in Australia, and some of those names that we mentioned really do punch above their weight globally. And even in the subsector that we're talking about today, we've got some world-class companies. The challenge is there's not many of them in Australia. But we'll get to that. Let's keep talking about the overall industry. It is massive. So it employs about 13% of Australia's total workforce, about 1.7 million people in 2022. Healthcare expenditure is about 10% of Australia's GDP. And if you just look at the government budget, it's about 16 or 17% of the government budget, federal budget, is on healthcare. So it's massive. Unsurprisingly, with such a big industry, there's a number of physical locations. So this is just hospitals. This doesn't include day clinics or GPs.
Yeah.
But Australia has about 1,300 hospitals. Now, it's a pretty even split between public and private. About 700 public hospitals, about 600 private hospitals.
Pretty big.
Massive.
Yeah.
A lot of them co-located.
Meaning they're
That-
next to each other.
We'll get into that in my history.
Okay. We're a big wind up for this. To give you a breakdown of the value of the sector, you said ran 241 billion. This is from the Australian Government Institute of Health and Welfare. Of that 241 billion, 96 billion is spent on those 1,300 hospitals. Of that, 77 billion is spent on public, 19 billion spent on private.
Which was surprising to me. I would have thought... So you look at the 700 public hospitals, 600 private hospitals, pretty even split. But the money, like 77 billion spent on public hospitals, 19 billion on private hospitals. And that's not just government money. That's like all sources of funding. Of that 19 billion spent on private hospitals, the government website breaks it down again. And it's like 3/4 of it is health insurance and out of pocket and stuff like that.
That's good though. We're in the public service is a world leading in Australia here, isn't it?
Yeah, I guess it is good.
I don't know. Is it good? Like, I just think like the private are held up by some of the other things that you mentioned.
Yeah.
No?
All right, Bryce, this has been what everyone's been waiting for, the quick 40-year history of private hospitals in Australia. Okay. And I think this really sets the context for what we're talking about today. So back to the 1980s, there was a view that capital markets would fuel they would give hospitals the fuel that they needed. So there was a lot of hospital operators that listed. There were a lot of listed companies that moved into the healthcare space. James Hardie operated hospitals like it was a big thing. That quickly led to there was a lot of money raised, but then there was a profit motive put on a lot of these hospitals, and investors wanted a return, and patient care suffered. Yeah. In the late 80s, a lot of them started dwindling. They started to struggle. A lot of them merged or collapsed. By the time we get to the 1990s, there were three big listed for-profit hospital operators: Ramsay, Healthscope, and Maine. Here's why they were the ones that survived. First of all, they went to rural locations. So insurance companies, if you're in Sydney, there were lots of hospital choices, so they could play them off against each other in terms of price. If you had the only hospital in Wagga, say, you could set your prices, and insurance were price takers, not price makers.
Yeah.
Ramsay also got a massive contract to run the hospitals for the Department of Veterans Affairs.
Nice.
And so that kept them in business through the lean years of the 90s. And the model sort of emerged also of co-locating with public hospitals as well. So you'll go around today and you'll often see public and private hospitals located next to each other. So those were the three big operators, but the system was struggling. Maine went bankrupt in 2005. Maine has a long history. If you want to look them up on Wikipedia, they owned part of Optus for a while. They owned
never heard of them.
Armaguard. Yeah, like they did a bunch of stuff. And that left two: Healthscope and Ramsay. And in 2005, the ACCC started looking at them because the sector was so consolidated. Ramsay had 27% of the private hospital market. Healthscope had 17%. Healthscope then sold to...
Was the rest just piecemeal?
Yeah.
Just fragmented?
There's a couple of other big players that we'll get to later. Yeah. And then Healthscope sold to Brookfield in 2019.
Brookfield being the private equity?
Yeah, like the pension and like an infrastructure manager, the Canadians, yeah. And that left only one listed big bopper hospital operator in Australia. And that is the biggest of them all. Not in the world, but massive still, Ramsay.
So they are now the only listed left?
Hospital
operator, yeah, for private.
Yeah, there might be tiny ones that we didn't get to, but yeah.
Well, we'll unpack those in a little bit. But that's probably a good point, Ren, to compare Firstly, well done on the 40 years in 40 seconds.
Definitely was more than 40 seconds.
It was, but it was tight.
But I think that's the context that you need to be like, there's not a lot of big hospital players in Australia.
Yeah. Now, to understand the industry, we really need to understand the business model. This is, and that comes down to understanding where the money flows.
Yes.
It's an industry where those receiving the service don't pay for it, and those that deliver the service don't get paid for it.
Yes, yeah. Directly.
Confusing.
Yeah.
Directly.
Yeah.
It's ultimately from doctor to patient.
Yes.
That's the business model.
Yeah.
But then the money flows at a little bit different.
Yes. Well, the payer is often the insurance company or government. So we don't generally pay directly for the healthcare we receive. And then the payee, the person being paid or the entity being paid, is the hospital or the government if it's a public hospital, rather than the doctor making the medical decisions in the room.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it could be that government pays government.
Yeah. Government can pay government, and confusingly, it could be Medicare is federal government, and then hospitals are generally state government run. So it can often be federal government paying state government, but you can also get situations of federal government paying federal government or state government paying state government. It can all happen.
Messy.
So it does get pretty messy. And then when you're trying to analyze a business like Ramsay, or, we'll talk about some of the other players in the space like the Sonic Healthcares and the Heliuses, you've got to it's not just consumer demand.
Yeah.
It's also like what the government is then willing to pay.
Yeah.
And it gets even more confusing because even though private health insurance isn't government run, government caps the increases each year. So
Doesn't feel like it.
well, the private health industry has to go to government and say, this is what we want to raise. And the government can say no. So in December last year, the Health Minister, Mark Butler, declined a 6% increase in private health insurance premiums.
Wow.
So it's like...
But what impact does that have then on the government's budget? Do they...
No, it doesn't affect the government budget. It's just like regulated, I guess.
They're just saying you're going to cap it.
Yeah. And so it's like then the private health insurance companies and the private hospitals then negotiate like a price list basically. But the insurance companies can only raise their prices so much. And so then that affects what they can pay the hospital operators. It's a messy industry.
God, it's awful.
And there's pockets that make huge amounts of money. But yeah.
Wow. So according to the Ramsay website, a split of how the cash or who pays for healthcare is as follows. So 43% of it is funded by national taxes.
i.e. Medicare.
Medicare, yeah. The state and territory government taxes then cover 28%. Then there's the patient out-of-pocket payments, which are 14%. Private health insurance is 8%. And then accident compensation schemes are the remaining 7%. Approximately 45% of the population has private health insurance.
And to be honest, I think that number... So Ramsay, if you're listening, your website's out of date. I'm pretty sure that number's now 55%.
That's higher than I thought.
Really?
Yeah.
That was lower than I thought.
Yeah, I just generally felt that... maybe it's just the age we're in where it's still a choice for a number of people. Are kind of like I don't need it right now. But yeah, that's higher than I thought.
There you go.
Yeah.
All right, Bryce. Well, I think we've done enough to establish who's who in the zoo in terms of the industry, but we want to approach this from an investing lens. And so let's talk about how we can actually invest in the industry. And it's such a big industry. We've kind of confined ourselves to the providers of that healthcare, the hospitals and the medical centers, rather than what is provided in that healthcare, i.e. the devices and the pharmaceuticals.
That'll come later. That's a whole...
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, that's
all the fun things you listed in your speech.
I know. Yeah. Look, we've got plenty more episodes to go. So I guess the big question is, as investors, we're really looking at the private healthcare space because that's where we can play. That's where we can invest. And so the question is, who are some of the big players that are available to be invested in?
Well, we've said Ramsay 100 times already, so we should start with Ramsay, the biggest player here in Australia and with a global footprint, market cap of $11 billion. Not only the largest operator here, as I said, with 70 locations, but they have locations in US, UK, and Europe, 540 locations in total. So listed here, but global operations.
Yeah.
Secondly, we have HealthScope, which, Ren, as you mentioned, was bought out by Brookfield.
Was listed on the ASX until like 2019.
Yeah.
And then once again, the opportunity set dwindles for people like us as big pockets of private
retail
money
investors
come and take it.
Yeah, they own 38. Well, they operate 38 private hospitals, but unfortunately, yes, not listed anymore. Then there's Sonic. Now, Sonic aren't the hospital operator. They are a diagnostic imaging.
And pathology.
Blood
tests. If you ever get your blood taken at a GP clinic in that little like nurse's corner, it likely was Sonic.
Could have maybe been something.
Could have maybe been Helios. No, they all own like multiple brands.
Oh, okay. It's like a roll up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know the little side room.
We all know it. Yeah. So Sonic's actually bigger than Ramsay. Sonic has a $12 billion market cap. They operate across the world. They're the world's third largest provider of diagnostic imaging. Wow. They're massive. Australia, the US, Europe, they're big.
Then we've got Helios, again, pathology and diagnostic imaging with a $1 billion market cap. So it's more on the small cap side. And then Integral Diagnostics, they are radiology and diagnostic imaging as well. Much smaller market cap at 500 million.
Now, there is a long tail after that of smaller healthcare providers, but again, in terms of just limiting the scope of what we're talking about today, these are some of the bigger players in Australia.
So, Ren, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
So 70 locations operated by Ramsay here in Australia. Yeah. 38 by Brookfield or HealthScope.
We should be clear that those numbers were just the most recent we could find.
Sure. Yeah. So call it about 100. But we set up the top that there's roughly 600 private hospitals in Australia.
Yes.
So who is owning and operating the remaining 5?
Yeah, great question. The answer is the not-for-profit sector is massive. And in particular, religious organizations.
Really?
Yeah. Like the Catholic Church is massive. So the latest numbers we could find that the Catholic Church operates 21 public hospitals, 54 private hospitals, and 550 aged care facilities in Australia.
Wow.
Yeah. So like St. Vincent's is, it's public, but it's owned and run by the Catholic Church. Yeah, basically, like the St. John's and the St. Mary's and the St. Vincent's. Yeah. They're all run by Catholic organizations that ultimately are not-for-profit and funnel their money back to the church.
Wow.
That sounds nefarious.
I mean, I can speak from experience. My mum spent a number of years in St. Vincent's, and the accommodation that they give the families, if you're living in rural areas and you have to come to Sydney, where you were living with the nuns.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So we were.
Do we get a lot of nuns these days?
I don't know. I haven't caught up. I haven't kept up with it. But they owned all of the terraces in Darlinghurst, like a huge strip. Yeah, and you would stay on the bottom floor of all the terraces, and the nuns would live on the top
If you
floor.
ever go to the Vatican and you see the amount of gold there, it's because they own all the terraces in Darlinghurst. So here's a fun fact for you.
Okay.
The Catholic Church runs 26% of the world's hospitals.
What?
Yeah, 26% of the world's hospital. It is the largest non-government provider of healthcare services in the world. It operates around 5,500 hospitals, 5,500 hospitals, 18,000 clinics, and 16,000 homes for the elderly.
Far out.
Yeah.
That is incredible.
Yeah.
That is 26% of the world's hospitals.
Yeah.
By the Catholic Church. Far out.
I know, it's wild.
They are everywhere.
So, and that's just the Catholic Church. A lot of churches run hospitals. Anglican Church would, they've got Anglicare, which is more, I think, like old people's homes. But Presbyterians, that would all be in it. Schools, hospitals, and aged care seems to be the domain of the churches. But that's where the other private hospitals are.
Well, there you go. That answers the question. So you've got a couple are listed and then the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Let's compare the pair between Australia and globally. We've just covered off some of the largest players here globally. Now, to give you some context, the global healthcare industry is valued at $8 to $10 trillion. Compare that to 241 billion here in Australia. So it's a huge industry. The healthcare expenditure globally is at about 10% of global GDP, in line with Australian expenditure. The industry is expected to grow at about 6% CAGR over the next few years, with North America holding the largest market share, approximately 40% of global revenue in 2023. But when you put some of the big players head to head, the numbers are pretty stark. The biggest player here in Australia is Ramsay, 540 sites globally, but the biggest player around the world is HCA Healthcare. $85 billion market cap, 214 hospitals, 2,000 sites of care across the US and the UK. Still a drop in the water compared to the Catholic Church. I can't get over it. 26%. Then when you're looking at diagnostic imaging and pathology operators, Sonic, 13 billion and market cap and 2,000 locations. But globally, it's Quest Diagnostics, 16 billion market cap, 5,902 locations globally.
Yeah, now that 13 billion is Aussie dollars, that 16 billion is US dollars. So there's a bit more of a gap there. But yeah, Sonic is big. Like, it's third biggest in the world. Yeah, it's impressive.
They are impressive. Like, they're big companies, but like in the grand scheme of things, for what they do and the sites they operate and the site scale of them, like their market caps aren't.
No, yeah, I know. But we've just been, our minds have been warped by tech.
True.
Yeah, like I was thinking about this recently because I've just finished the Paramount Global book.
Oh yeah.
And it's like a $10 billion company, and you're like, that's tiny. But it's like, it's a $10 billion company.
Yeah, you're right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fair call.
Yeah.
Fair call.
But I know what you're saying. Like a $13 billion company for the third biggest imaging and pathology.
In a $10 trillion industry. Well, I guess that's like obviously across everything.
Yeah.
But yeah, like these are the biggest of the big.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if it's 10 trillion and Eli Lilly is, no, but that's market value, not spending and revenue. Anyway, let's not get too deep into that. Let's keep moving. And I guess talk about some of the quirks of these companies if you're thinking about them from an investing lens. So let's start with Sonic. It was a massive COVID winner.
Okay.
Which makes it a post-COVID loser.
What was
as
it about?
Things normalize.
So this was pathology.
Yeah, like testing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because of COVID, people just went to get their blood tested more?
No,
or?
I think more that they were contracted by governments to run testing.
To do it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Did you go and get your blood tested?
That's what I was thinking. I was like, no, I'm pretty sure you didn't get your blood tested.
I got weekly X-rays. So in their reports, they now have to split out base revenue and COVID revenue because since like the first half of 2022, their revenue's gone down. Yeah. But from a base revenue point of view, in the most recent half, they did 4.27 billion Aussie dollars, and they did 40 million in COVID revenue that they call it. So, I don't know, government contracts for testing. But at its peak in a half, they did almost $1.5 billion in COVID revenue.
Wow.
And so, yeah, if you just looked at their top line revenue, it's come down, but you have to normalize it for COVID.
Yeah.
And if you normalize it for COVID, it's still growing.
Baseline revenue.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then what about Ramsay?
Yeah, so we had a look at Ramsay's financials just quickly because there's a lot to unpack here. Their top line growth has been pretty incredible. So they did about $8.5 billion in revenue in 2016. And that's grown to almost $15 billion in the most recent financial year. So they've almost doubled their revenue in 7 years. Impressive.
That's pretty good.
Yeah. But if you look at their profit has halved in that time.
Ooh.
So in 2016, they did $440 million in profit. They had a margin of about 5%. In 2023, they did a profit of $285 million, which is a margin of 1.9%.
Wow. I didn't think it could get much worse than retail.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. But here is the quirk.
Okay.
And this is why you have to look at a company's financials closely. Because I looked at that and I was like, that doesn't make sense to me. Like, so if you look at their cash flow statement, their cash flow has been growing.
Mm-hmm.
And so then it's like, okay, so there's a cost line here that isn't related. It's depreciation. Their depreciation cost is almost $1 billion a year now.
Wow.
Yeah. And like back in 2016, it was like 300 million or something like that.
Oh, wow.
So that's grown massively. I did then cash flow margin. Don't know if that's a thing, but like cash flow over revenue as a percentage. And it's like 9%.
Okay.
So it's like, okay, so this company is still generating a heap of cash,
Yeah.
but depreciation, which is a non-cash cost,
Yeah.
it's
It's cooking it.
yeah, it's just making their profit look small. Like obviously two well-run, large Aussie businesses that are growing top-line revenue pretty impressively. Obviously, take away the COVID blip for Sonic.
So where's this coming from? And I guess that leads to questions around the future here, because it feels like it's an interplay of government, demographics, private equity, public versus private. Like, there's a lot to consider here when you're investing in these companies. So yeah, what's driving that revenue? And I guess let's start the conversation of what's the future hold.
Yeah, well, I think like if you're approaching the future as an investor, you can really approach it in two ways. You can go top down and you say, a rising tide is going to lift most boats here, and let's talk about the overall industry drivers. Or there's like incredibly good businesses or with like breakthrough technologies or breakthrough business models that even if they get a small percentage of such a big industry, they're going to be massive companies. And like as an investor, both ways of doing it are valid. I reckon for a lot of these Australian companies though, you're more just going to be tied to the overall global healthcare market. Like if you're already the third biggest operator of pathology and imaging, or if you're already one of the biggest hospital operators.
Yeah, but these guys also aren't like, these ones aren't the ones out there innovating and like trying to find.
Well, if you ask them, they would
technology.
say that.
Yeah, they're not the ones growing 3D organs. Like,
True.
okay.
But they will be the ones. But you see, that's the other interplay, this is. We can talk about this here in terms of future growth, but this is a current problem, which is so many of these breakthrough medical technologies are just wild, but insurance companies can't pay for them a lot of the time. But then these private hospital operators want to offer it as a service because people going to private hospitals want the best surgeries and the best equipment and the best outcomes. And so there's this really interesting dynamic between the device makers and the pharmaceutical companies, I guess, the hospital operators and the insurance companies.
And if the insurance companies don't pay for it,
well, then
it's out of pocket.
Out of pocket, yeah.
And then it's just ridiculously expensive.
Yeah.
And then your market size just dramatically shrinks.
Yeah.
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 So if you're an investor, where do you actually want to play in that three-part dynamic? Insurers?
Tech.
Yeah. Fuck healthcare.
Yeah, I don't know. Not insurers.
Yeah.
I made a pronouncement a couple of weeks ago that I'd never invest in an airline.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to say the same about insurers, but insurance just seems like a brutally tough business. Like, I guess we do invest in insurers. We both own Berkshire. But like, how many ways can you get squeezed as a company?
Yeah.
Like, there's not a lot of love for insurance companies, and I don't have a lot of love for them.
Yeah.
So, but let's have some sympathy for them for a moment. Their customers, like people like you and I who pay insurance premiums, constantly pissed off at them for not covering more, for jacking premiums too much, and then when we do claim, trying to wiggle and weasel their way out of it every time. Then the people that they're actually like buying the services off, so in this case like hospitals, constantly trying to jack prices, constantly trying to get more money out of them, and when they charge their patients out of pocket, they just say your insurance company didn't cover it, blame them. Like,
they're
so
off the
just,
hook.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then the
then
government,
capping prices.
they're here saying, look, the hospital operators are doing these crazy surgeries. People want it because it's saving lives, but we can't afford to pay for it. The government whacks them away and says, you can't raise your premiums. Like, you are getting squeezed from every direction.
And after all that, I still don't feel sorry for them. Okay, so not the insurers.
I feel like medical device makers and
if it
pharmaceutical
hits,
companies.
If it hits,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like, look, just without looking it up, who have been the big healthcare winners of the past decade?
Well, we're talking about them at the moment. Do you mean like in the context we're talking about? Or
No, just
across the
healthcare
field?
broadly defined.
Oh, like all of the medical device guys, pharmaceuticals.
Yeah, like Novo Nordisk,
Yeah,
Eli Lilly,
Johnson & Johnson.
yeah,
those big
CSL,
ones.
Cochlear,
ResMed.
ResMed till recently.
Telix that's just coming through.
Yeah,
absolutely
yeah.
smashing it.
Like, that's where the money seems to be made. Yeah.
True. Okay. Problem solved. Case closed. But
And
anyway,
maybe we'll do an industry deep dive on them next.
we should.
So I think from the let's get back to where the future is, and
Yeah.
from a top down perspective, like, there's no doubt that this industry is going to get bigger, and there's a few big things driving that industry. The first is just our demographics. So we have an aging population. As we get older, we need more healthcare. Here's a fun fact for you. This isn't necessarily related to old people, but it correlates. 8% of Australia's healthcare costs was spent in the last year of life.
A person's last year of life.
Yeah. Or like everyone's last year. Yeah. So,
wow.
yeah. So if we all just died a year earlier, we would save about, what's 8% of 240 bill? Call it
Almost like
16, 20
yeah.
bill. Yeah.
Not bad. Wow.
And that's why the government introduced euthanasia. No. So the first driver is just the aging population. That is going, as we get older, as the population pyramid inverts, that's going to drive up healthcare spending. Related, but not the same, is we're all just getting sicker. Call it our food supply chain, call it our lack of exercise, call it whatever you want, but like chronic disease is just rising, obesity related diseases, heart disease, like it's just, we're getting sicker as a Western world.
Our gut health is cooked.
Gut health is cooked.
Yeah.
And GLP-1 drugs aren't going to save us.
No, maybe.
And so the second big driver of cost increase is just going to be, we're all getting sicker and we need more healthcare. And none of us do anything preventative. We all just
hope for the best.
Just get sick and go to hospital.
Yeah.
And then I think the third one is one that we just touched on, which is ongoing advancements in medical technology are going to be more and more expensive.
Yeah.
You know, things like this oncoming era of personalized medicine, some of the crazy breakthroughs, even just like, even
look at GLP-1s. So expensive.
Yeah.
So expensive.
Yeah. Even just like advances in surgery. And have you seen this Da Vinci machine?
As in the robotic, like surgeon.
Yeah. It's crazy.
Phenomenal.
If you're listening to this and you haven't seen it, just Google it, because we're not going to be able to describe it. But it's like, it's pretty wild, like the technology that's out there.
Is it going to be though that unfortunately it's income, like you're going to have to just be wealthy to get this stuff?
I guess so. Like I mean, that's
the
kind of
squeeze of government, the squeeze of insurance companies. Like,
yeah, I mean that's been the story with these GLP-1 drugs. It's like $1,000 out of pocket a month in the US. I don't know what it is in Australia, but yeah,
it's a shame. Anyway,
yeah. I mean, things do get subsidized by government, but government has this similar problem to private health insurance,
that's
which
what
is
I mean. Like,
like they just can't afford everything for everyone. Bernie Sanders, the US senator, has come out and said he thinks GLP-1 drugs could bankrupt Medicare in the US.
Wow.
Medicare and Medicaid, yeah.
Because so many people will claim on it.
Yeah, if they don't cover it now, but it was like, if they do.
But you would almost do a business case on it to say that's fine because the other financial benefits here are
like
going to be
the obesity-related spending will be heaps down.
Because you might find that stuff some of this advancements is so crazy that the government go, you know what, like, we should put some cash behind, or like, what's the word, like,
Subsidize.
Yes, we should subsidize this because it's just going to be a game changer.
Yeah. So that's a whole other conversation that we can have. Bernie Sanders open invite on the pod. So I think those are the factors expected to drive growth in spending. Over the past 5 years in Australia, hospital costs have risen 21%. So that's not small, and nothing really indicates that that's going to slow down.
So just to close that, hospital costs rise, so then the providers push through those cost increases to insurers?
Well, I think they just constantly are negotiating.
Yeah.
And then insurers try and raise their premiums. And then
so
the government say
circle
no.
goes,
And then we all
just goes
hate
around
insurance
in circles.
companies.
Yeah. Wow. So, Ren, let's close out then by talking about how we can invest. We've spoken about individual companies here in Australia. Ramsay, the ticker is RHC, and Sonic, the ticker is SHL.
Yeah.
Of course, there's...
Helios is also a billion-dollar company.
Helios. Yeah. There are plenty others in the healthcare industry that we haven't touched on. The big ones, CSL, Cochlear, ResMed here in Australia, that we will need to do another deep dive on at some point. But you're probably sitting there going, is there an ETF that I can use to capture the growth that we've been speaking about and what is a huge industry here in Australia?
And the good news is there is.
The good news is there are a number of healthcare ETFs. We should be very clear, though, that this then, what we're talking about here, brings it up back to the level of healthcare, not just specifically the healthcare operators that we've been speaking about.
Yeah.
So these are global healthcare ETFs.
Yeah. So there's 4 that I could find in Australia. I've excluded the Global X one because it's this covered call and growth ETF. And we'll just like that.
Yeah.
So there's 3 that are listed in Australia. iShares Global Healthcare, IXJ, BetaShares Global Healthcare Drug, DURG, and VanEck Global Healthcare Leaders, HLTH. No surprises who I'm giving the ticker award to. Drug.
Yeah.
BetaShares, they have good tickers.
They do, yeah.
So the iShares and BetaShares one, here's a look at their top 5. Eli Lilly, United Health, Novo Nordisk, Johnson & Johnson, Merck.
Both identical.
Identical top 5s.
Yeah.
It does change a little bit after that, but like the indexes are very similar. So you'd be looking at what fees you're paying and stuff like that. VanEck, let me tell you their top 5. Shockwave Medical, Tenet Healthcare, ResMed, Ipsen, Amgen. How many of those companies do you recognize?
1.
What's going on with them?
They obviously have a different methodology for creating the ETF. Yeah. They're not following the same indexes.
No.
iShares and BetaShares.
So they are doing... So they pick 50 companies, or their index provider picks 50 companies every 6 months, and then they equal weight them.
Nice.
Well, sorry. They pick 50 companies, and then every 6 months they equal weight them. Yeah. I'm not sure how often those 50 companies change.
Rotate through.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess Shockwave Medical and Tenet Healthcare have had the best share market performance since the last rebalance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow, well, there you go. So you've got 2 that capture the big tech names, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, Johnson.
Tech.
Oh, sorry. So in tech. The big healthcare names, Eli Lilly, Novo Nordisk, J&J, and then the healthcare from VanEck is a little bit more, I wouldn't say niche, but it seems to be a little bit more targeted. So there are a number out there that give you exposure if you're not able to do the work and find individual companies. But there are some certainly great listed companies here in Australia. And I think to close out, Ren, from what you said at the top, like we are living in a moment in history where we are going through some pretty incredible breakthroughs and with AI and what that's doing in the medical space, supercomputers, when they kick off, it's going to be incredible. So certainly an industry that I wish I spent more time looking into because...
Nothing's stopping you.
I know, but I it's just so vast and so big. It's just like, where do you start? And so, yeah.
Yeah.
Obviously, you pick somewhere to start and go from
Yeah.
there. But like, it's pretty amazing. So look, if you have an industry that you would like us to do a deep dive on, head to equitymates.com/contact and leave us a suggestion. We do have plenty coming up throughout the second half of this year. All suggestions coming in from the community. Loved the 40-year history of private hospitals in Australia, so we'll make sure we try and do that for many other industries coming up. But Ren, we'll leave it there.
Yep.
As always, great to chat stocks.
Yeah. One last plug. If you do want to keep up to date with what's happening in the healthcare sector, in our Equity Mates email, we seem to over-index on healthcare stories.
Yes.
Like the most recent one, we did the latest on Elon Musk's Neuralink brain implant.
Yeah.
And breakthroughs in the scientists can now build artificial embryos. Well, they're not artificial because they're made from biological material, but they can make make embryos from stem cells. So yeah, we over-index on healthcare breakthroughs because we're both fascinated by them.
Wow.
So make sure you sign up.
Even Neuralink, we didn't even talk about that, but it's because it's not listed. But like that,
It's also, is it healthcare? I guess it is. It's a device.
that's
It's a
the
device.
perfect
Yeah.
mix of tech and healthcare.
No, Cochlear is the perfect mix of tech and healthcare.
Ear implants,
Dude.
Come on.
Okay. I know we're not doing devices, but Cochlear's business model is we'll put an implant in, which can last up to like 70 years, and then you are constantly locked into their cycle of upgrades.
Yeah, it's perfect.
How good is that moat?
Yeah, that's perfect. It's not as sexy as brain implants, but sure, they've done well for themselves.
Here's why it's sexier. It works.
It's an actual business. Fair call.
No, look,
We'll pick up implants.
Elon's brain chip worked for 3 months.
Oh, and then what happened?
Well, the threads have started to retract
Oh, shit.
and like disconnect. Yeah.
Oh, shit. Is the person all right?
Yeah, person's fine. Like not dangerous at all. But if they keep these like tiny threads that are thinner than a human hair read the brainwaves, if enough of them like disconnect, then the device won't work.
Wow. Far out. Anyway, a lot to unpack. If you'd like us to do a deep dive on any of the above, let us know. But Ren, we'll leave it there. We'll pick it up next episode.
Sounds good.